What she needs is a dose of reality, not a ticket to your little nursery rhyme world.
How dare you? Don't be upset just because you don't like the way your lie's been told. If you ask me, it makes you look better.
All right, we are back on Play It Forward with LB today, filmmaker, writer, director. We're going to be talking about Princess and the Pea, a short film that you made. And L, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for
You,
having
you
me.
got it. Appreciate it. Before we start, can you introduce yourself and as a filmmaker, however you'd like?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a writer, director by trade. I also produce, but I would say like before anything, I've always been a writer. I started writing pretty early. I discovered Maya Angelou at an early age. So that really informs the type of artist I wanted to be. I loved how multidisciplinary she was.
Maya Angelou. Oh, yeah. I
Yeah,
was like, who
Maya
was,
Angelou.
okay, got it.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of her. She also just encouraged me to become an artist. Started really with poetry, and so a lot of my work has a poetic style to it, I would say, whether it's the writing or even the visuals. I really like movement. I'm also a lot into surrealism and shot design, so I think that's something that I've always really enjoyed. But yeah, I really love stories with impact. I love stories that discuss things that we kind of grapple with in humanity in a day to day. I like I've always been driven also to like kind of like psychological thrillers, things that make you think. That's kind of like my favorite thing to explore. And I feel like as a director, I've really kind of like been pushing for that and probably will continue throughout my career.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. It's a great intro in terms of what drives you. And in terms of Princess and the Pea, how would you summarize the plot?
Mhm. Okay, let me see. A good way to summarize would say like because I it's actually funny that you even brought that up because I would say like in writing the log line and just like summarizing it, I found it really hard to think about that because I feel like it explores different things. There's different perspectives and angles that you could look at it, but one of the ways that I would describe it is a young mother grapples whether or not to tell her daughter um who has been basically like submitting her accents with a fairy that she really is real. So her daughter has been replacing her absence with a belief in a fairy, and she decides whether or not to tell her the truth.
Right. Thank you. Uh, so there's three primary characters in it, and there is the young mother who is clearly working to get healthy in one way or another and take responsibility. And she wants to take responsibility, and she feels, I think, a certain um, guilt, certainly, at not being with her daughter, who is with her mother. So she's with Nana. And Nana is very fantasy driven, and the idea of creating a world that is magical and one that is um, loving. So those are her two primary motives, or um, uh, maybe if they're not motives, they're her two primary forces that she brings. She's seeking to protect her children, and she did this with her daughter, and it seemingly backfired. Her daughter blames her for the fantasy world that she grew up in, and that didn't set her up for success and resilience, and that's part of the reason why she is struggling now. Her mother doesn't necessarily take that on as truth. So we come to there's a moment that happens in this woman's life, and she's like, okay, I've got to take some ownership. I've got to talk to my daughter. I've got to step in. I've got to intercede. She feels some pangs of conscience, and that's where we begin and set up the plot. And so the dynamics of everything is, there's this interrelatedness between the spectrum of reality through fantasy, and where's a lie? where does the, what is a lie, and is a white lie a lie? And I believe it is. That's my personal opinion on it, but it is. And so a lie is just a non-truth, right? Whatever, and truth is that which is in accordance to our experience of um, the world. So here we are trying to kind of play with these themes of what is reality, what is truth, what is a lie. Where did that initiative and that those experiences in your own personal life, how did those themes come out in this movie? Where did it come from? Your
I was like,
desire
yeah.
to pursue these themes.
Yeah, so this is one of the films that I would say they kind of talk about it occasionally. I've heard where when you make films, it actually becomes like therapeutic in a sense. And I this is a film that really came out so naturally. And to be honest, when I first wrote it, I didn't even understand it myself. And as I was in the process of creating it, layers upon layers of my own reality started to reveal itself, and I was like, oh, I remember I was in casting actually, and I had Charlize Taylor, who's like the main actress, the young mother. I remember she was reading lines, and there was a moment where I was like, oh my God, this is like about my mother. Like our relationship is so unique. And I love my mother. She's like got an incredible imagination, always has. Like she tried to get me to believe in Santa until I was like 12 years old. Like it was just kind of like I was kind of my imagination was always just fueled and just accepted in the house. And I started to just think so much about how I was getting older and how like there was part of me that felt like maybe it was too much, but then I also had this like appreciation of it because it made me an artist and it made me who I am today, I feel like. So it was kind of, I think that what's interesting that I feel like in watching the film, like older now, I think like it kind of talks a little bit about the inner child, a lot of inner child wounds, but then also it's like almost getting it to a point where you can accept yourself at a point and also accept the dualities of who you are. So I would say like a lot of layers of that came up. And I feel like what's hard about it is like, well, not hard about it. I didn't want to make it easy for people to say, oh, this is wrong or right, because there's parts about her daughter believing that she's a fairy that are really good for her, that are feeding her. Like you see her imagination blossoming. It's very creative and very fun. You can imagine that like being a kid, she's enjoying it, to a certain degree. But I think it's the concern that Eliza has down the line of like when she realizes that it's not real, will that ruin her? And how will she explore that herself? And I think that's like a lot of things. It's a very confronting film, I would say. Like I would say like that was a big thing that I know Eliza felt like, well, that's what I wanted her to, to kind of communicate, was that it was very confronting on, okay, this is what happened to you. Do you believe this? Do you see the duality in this situation? And the perspective is different. And I kind of wanted to be in a place where judgment wasn't really able to be had on either character, because I feel like at the end of the day, we're all human. We should leave a little room to, I would say, like, allow for everyone's perspective to live. So I guess that's like one thing for me that was big.
You know, the biggest lie in it, really, besides, I mean, the fantasy stuff is we can talk about that in a minute. But the real biggest lie is that the child is told that this person is her aunt and it's really her mother. So that's, the biggest lie. And then in terms of the fantasy and exploring the fantasy, and I really appreciate how you're saying, you're writing it, you don't really know what you're doing and you're going with it. And that's like the best, you got to step into that unknown to get to a new place and a creative place. And so you get there at the end with this sense of, okay, this child is showing the mother after the mother has told her, and the child is showing her something from her imagination, and it triggers something in the mother's imagination, and the mother all of a sudden sees the truth in the fantasy. There is something that you're bringing in from the imaginative world that is true, that is real, that is important and vital and essential in the foundation of who we are as people, with having our carrying that inner child in us still is connected to that imagination. That seems to be what you're saying. Is it? Or what the movie is?
Yes, definitely. I would say like I think that there's something beautiful to be had about like also just like having an imagination. And I would say that like one thing at least that's become true in my life is just like my wild imagination has brought me very far. And sometimes it's like not saying I always didn't really love the like fake it till you make it belief, but it always was in my mind like if you have a direction that you're going and it seems so far from where you are in that place, there has to be something that gets you to keep going. And sometimes it does feel a little delusional. And I always wondered to myself, like, maybe being brought up with this like sense of you can really do anything. I mean, my mom kind of drilled that into me. Both my parents did to a certain degree, but I would say my dad was always more practical. But I was like, I wonder if that delusion actually got me to do what I'm doing now. Just being like a Black female director, being in a male dominated field and having to deal with so much pressure. And I think just even my journey itself, it hasn't been easy. Pretty much every step along the way of my career, I've had to really push and kind of step out on a limb and be like, hey, like bold enough to think, okay, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can try to go create this work that I'm so passionate about. So I do think that's like something that has become really honest for me, at least.
For sure. The imaginative faculty is where vision is held. So we hold that vision in order to get to a destination that we believe is there. And in that way, so is this young child holding a vision of an ideal. And just because the circumstances um, aren't necessarily well, they're not ideal in terms of her parental circumstances. She ideal is still there, and there may be still truth to that in terms of she is cared for, she is loved, and those essential qualities are there. I believe William Blake has some, he's got this pantheon of, gods that he's created. And I believe that the most important is the imagination, the God that's responsible for that, because it is the connection to God, that aspect of our um, minds, or is
Yeah.
allows us to go beyond the intellect. Um, so from that perspective, it's essential to our shared humanity, regardless of our belief system. You know, but getting back to maybe a little bit more grounded in Princess and the Pea. Now that you've made it, we've talked about some of the themes, and here you are, you're watching it. What does it tell you? What is the message that now it shares with you?
Mhm. I think looking back to and having like really thought about the process and how much at that time I wasn't almost understanding as much as was being uncovered. I think at the time I was really struggling with. I was like, okay, I see what this is kind of about, but what does this mean for me? And what is this film representing? And I actually think like looking back now, especially like being older, is like it actually represents a certain level of protection actually on both sides, where it's like sometimes we want to protect each other from the pain of life when ultimately it is going to happen, whether or not you can't always protect and control things. Like I think the grandmother, Lori, she wants to protect her granddaughter from realizing that like she doesn't have a mother, and her actually substituting her mother's absence with a fairy is doing something for her. It's filling a void, you would say. And then I feel like for Eliza, she was hoping to give her a dose of reality so that she wouldn't be as hurt as she now feels, at least her not feeling prepared for life. So I think like looking back, it actually has a lot of duality, but also an understanding and perspective where like we can have different perspectives and there can be two things true at once. And I think that I have like more of an appreciation for different perspectives in my own life, a certain respect, I guess to say, because I do think that there's a truth that is revealed within both perspectives that I always am interested in discovering. And
The
like
shared
that's
truth between
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I'm really glad that you said that. The void, the mom has a void and she's trying to fill it with her sense of right doing, and the grandmother is trying to meet the child's void with her own sense of right doing. And, the question can be who's right and who's wrong. But I think, more importantly, and it seems that what the script and the narrative is supporting is that, the child um, is their safety and their sense of well-being is what's most important. So, and what is right for the child in that moment. And since the child is, 6 or 7, what was right for her in that moment may change um, as she grows and matures. What's critical is to be there for the other person in their times of needs and to meet them where they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. No,
Would
I think
you
that. Mhm.
would you yeah add anything to that?
Yes, I think so. In the last scene, I have a lot of kind of moments where Eliza's actually like looking at her own reflection in the mirror. And I think that there's a moment there where she's actually able to see herself within her daughter. And for the first time, she's basically spelling her name wrong. Like actually, well, not sorry spelling her name, but saying her name wrong throughout the film. Like you can kind of get a sense that they're not around often together. And I do think that like there's a big part of her getting to learn a new part of herself and getting to accept a part of herself towards the end. And it's actually brought about through her daughter's imagination, and she's able to see her own imagination and appreciate that. But it also, at the same time, was a thing that also caused her a lot of pain. So I think there's like a moment where she is confronted with her own her own issues, but also being able to accept that that part of her is still alive, and that it did take her through some amazing moments in life potentially, as she was younger. So there's like layers that I kind of built in the film with like her also having lost a parent at an early age. Like her father is not in this story, so it's kind of like it's not exactly saying exactly what her backstory is, but I was trying to kind of incorporate layers of
I
her
see it.
her
I see
reality
it
might be. So yeah.
for sure. I see that. I'm glad you brought that in. I think that's a really important part, that self-acceptance piece at the end. It really important. It's a very dense narrative for a short film, for sure. And thank you for sharing that with us. It's really important. Um, since making the film, how have you been personally changed?
Oh wow. I mean, that story, I think that that was a really big moment, a defining moment for me as a filmmaker. And I think it showed me a side of what I really it showed me what I really enjoy, because it came out so organically. I literally wrote it at like 4 a.m. Like it's probably a script that I've written the shortest time in. It took like 2 hours because I actually had two different ideas. And I remember I'd gone to my professor and neither of them were just sticking, And so I don't know what happened. Like I was living in New York at the time. I would really try to wake up at like 4 a.m. to escape just the world because no one's going to text you at the time. No one's going to email you. I really enjoyed kind of having that space to myself. And in that silence, all of a sudden, the story started writing itself. And I think that it really defined me in terms of the types of work that I really enjoy doing. It taught me that I really like self-discovery within my work. And it's something I'm really passionate about. That film was also a really difficult film to make. I mean, it was made on like a shoestring budget, but it also like showed me the commitment that I had to have. The post process took about like 2 years, almost a year and a half, and it wasn't even like meant to take 2 years. Like it just happened that like throughout the post process, like people just started having life happen, and I couldn't control it. But it also took me to like a really powerful moment for me. Like I had submitted to the short film corner in Cannes, and it wasn't in competition or anything, but it was um playing there, and I went. I got the
Oh,
opportunity
that's
to,
awesome.
and it really like excited me, and it showed me how big the world was for film. Like honestly, this film like took me when I went there, it changed my life, honestly. It just blew my like whole mind open
Mm.
about what this world could look like. And I love international film as well. So I just think like being able to be there, seeing it basically raised the stakes for me and it gave me more of a goal for like what I want.
How so? How did it blow your mind? Did you just see more diversity? What was it that
I
you saw?
I did. And I think also just going, I think it was like the second film festival I'd ever been to, but I think also having my film there, which was like special,
Yeah,
it
like
gave
you
me
can
that
do it.
goal.
You can be there.
Yeah, like it gave me that vision and
Yeah,
I needed that. It kind
yeah.
of goes back to that like part where I was talking about like the imagination. And every time I'm like creating something, I'm like, I have a moment that is like an I made it moment. I'm there again and I'm either potentially placing, I don't even need to win anything though. For me, just to be there and to have the pleasure to be there with so many other incredible artists. Um, in that beautiful place. I mean, it basically like brought a lot of my dreams alive and
That's
it
awesome.
really has sustained me since. So
Yeah, yeah. It's
it's just
all
fun.
doable. It's all doable, attainable. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Elle B, filmmaker, writer, director. The film is Princess and the Pea. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for exploring these themes that are very personal and very beautiful. And thank you for sharing them with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
It was a pleasure. Next time I'll play it forward, I'm about to disappear. Peace out.
Bye.
Thank you, Elle. Bye.